Do this to your hydrangeas before the first frost, or regret it next June. There is a short list of things to do for your hydrangeas before the first frost arrives, and whether you do them decides what the plant looks like next June. Skip them, and the regret does not show up for months. It shows up next summer, as a plant that comes back weak, or damaged, or covered in healthy leaves with no flowers, and by then there is nothing you can do but wait another year. That gap is the whole trap. Everything on this list happens now, in the fading weeks of the season, when the plant looks like it is finishing up and it is tempting to think the gardening year is basically over. What is actually happening is that your hydrangea is getting ready to survive winter and setting itself up for next year, and these few weeks before the frost are your last chance to help it do that. The plant that sails through winter and explodes with flowers next June, and the one that limps out of winter half dead, are very often separated by nothing more than what their owners did, or did not do, in this window. So, this video is the handful of jobs to get done before the first hard frost, and why each one matters for next June specifically. Some of them are things to do: watering, mulching, protecting, and a couple are things you must not do, because doing them right before winter is exactly how people cause the damage they are trying to prevent. The single most important one, the one that protects the plant more than anything else you can do, is not complicated and costs almost nothing, and I will get to it. But it is the one people most often skip, and skipping it is behind a huge share of winter-damaged hydrangeas. And how much of this you need to do depends heavily on two things: which of the 6 types of hydrangea you have, and how cold your winters actually get. Someone in a mild climate needs to do very little. Someone whose winters are genuinely harsh, with an old wood type, needs to do all of it. I will make that split clear. So you are not doing work you do not need, or skipping protection you do. The plant is not finished for the year. It is preparing, and it is at its most vulnerable right now. But first, you have to understand what your hydrangea is actually doing as it heads into winter, because that is what makes every one of these jobs matter. As the season winds down and the cold comes on, your hydrangea is doing 2 things that decide next year, and both of them are happening out of sight. The first is storage. Through late summer and autumn, the plant is pulling energy down out of its leaves and into its roots and crown, banking reserves to survive winter and to fuel next spring's growth. That is why the leaves eventually yellow and drop. The plant is emptying them and stashing what it needs below ground. A hydrangea that goes into winter with full, healthy reserves comes out of it strong. One that was stressed, starved, or damaged going in comes out weak. The second, on the old wood types, is that next year's flower buds are already formed and sitting on the plant. The big leaf mopheads, the mountain hydrangeas, the oak leaves, all set their buds in late summer, and those buds are now riding on the stems, dormant, waiting for spring. Which means that for these plants, next June's flowers are physically present on the plant all winter, exposed to whatever the cold throws at them. Protecting those buds through winter is protecting next year's entire display. Put those 2 things together, and you can see why this window matters so much. The plant is storing the energy it will run on next year, and on many types it is carrying next year's flowers on its stems through the whole winter. Both of those can be helped by what you do now, and both can be lost if the plant goes into winter dry, starved, exposed, or cut. And here is the thing that makes it so easy to get wrong. None of it shows up now. A hydrangea can go into winter poorly prepared and look completely fine in October. The bill comes due next June, when the plant either performs or does not, and almost nobody traces a disappointing summer back to a neglected autumn. So these weeks are not the end of the hydrangea year. They are the setup for the next one. Now, the first job, and it is the one people are most surprised to hear still matters this late: watering. Job 1. Keep watering deeply, right up until the ground freezes. This is the job people are most surprised still matters this late in the year, and skipping it is behind a huge share of winter damage. The instinct in autumn is to stop watering. The heat is gone, the plant is slowing down, the rain is more frequent, so it feels like the plant no longer needs it. But a hydrangea going into winter needs to be well hydrated, because a plant that enters the cold already dry and stressed is far more vulnerable to winter damage and dieback. Dry roots going into a freeze is one of the quiet reasons hydrangeas come out of winter in poor shape, and it is completely avoidable. Here is what is actually happening. Even as the top of the plant goes dormant and drops its leaves, the roots stay active well into autumn, and they keep taking up water as long as the soil is not frozen. A plant that goes into winter with moisture in its root zone is far better protected than one that goes in bone dry, because moist soil holds temperature more steadily, and hydrated tissue withstands cold better than parched tissue. Evergreen and woody plants alike come through winter better when they are watered right up to the freeze. So keep watering through autumn whenever the weather is dry, giving the plant deep, thorough soaks rather than light sprinkles, and keep going until the ground actually freezes or you get a consistent hard frost. That final deep drink before the soil locks up for winter is genuinely one of the most protective things you can do, and it is the step most people skip because it feels counterintuitive. Do not overdo it into waterlogging, because soggy soil freezing solid is its own problem, and a hydrangea sitting in cold, sodden ground can rot. You are aiming for evenly moist, not saturated. Ease off as the rain takes over, but do not cut it off entirely just because summer is gone. This job pairs directly with the next one, because a good deep watering followed by a thick mulch layer is the core of getting a hydrangea safely into winter. Now, the single most important frost prep job of all, the one that protects the plant more than anything else. Mulch. Job 2. Mulch the base of the plant, deeply. This is the single most important thing you can do for a hydrangea before winter. It costs almost nothing, and it is the one people most often skip. A thick layer of mulch over the root zone is the plant's winter blanket, and it does more to protect a hydrangea through the cold than anything else on this list. Its job is insulation. It keeps the soil temperature steady, and that steadiness is what actually protects the plant. Because the real danger in winter is not simply cold, it is the repeated freezing and thawing of the soil. Understand that, because it is the key to why mulch matters so much. When soil freezes and thaws over and over through winter, as temperatures swing above and below freezing, the ground physically heaves and shifts, and that movement tears at roots, and can literally push a plant partly out of the ground, exposing the crown and roots to the killing air. A thick mulch layer buffers those swings. It keeps the soil beneath it frozen more evenly, or unfrozen more evenly, rather than lurching back and forth. And that stability protects the roots and the crown far more than it protects against raw cold. Counterintuitively, mulch is not there to keep the ground warm. It is there to keep the ground's temperature steady. For the old wood types, there is a second payoff. Insulating and protecting the base and crown of a bigleaf or mountain hydrangea helps the plant hold on to the lower flower buds through winter, which is where next year's blooms are coming from. So apply a generous layer, several inches deep, of an organic mulch, shredded bark, wood chips, leaf mold, straw, or compost. Spread over the whole root area, extending out around the plant. Several inches, not a thin scattering, because you need real depth to insulate. Keep the mulch pulled back an inch or two from the stems themselves, though, rather than piling it up against them, because mulch heaped on the crown can trap moisture and cause rot. A ring of deep mulch around the base, not a volcano against the stems. Do this after the ground has cooled but before it freezes hard, so you are locking in protection for the winter ahead. It is cheap, it is quick, and it is the highest value job in this entire video. Now, a quick word. Because how much winter protection your hydrangea needs comes down to knowing exactly what you are growing. Quick one, right here. Because how much of this you actually need to do comes down to one question, and it is about to decide the biggest job still ahead. Which of the 6 types do you have? A panicle, in a mild climate, needs almost none of the winter protection coming up. An old wood bigleaf, where the winters are hard, needs all of it. Get the type wrong, and you either wrap a plant that never needed it, or leave next year's flowers exposed to a cold that kills them. That is the whole thing with this plant. A hydrangea is not one plant. It is 6 different types, wearing one name, and they differ in how much cold they take, whether their buds are exposed over winter, when they are pruned, and only 2 of them can change color at all. The person whose hydrangea comes back full and blooming every June is very often not doing more than you. They know exactly what they are growing, and they protect it accordingly. So, I put the honest version in one place. It is called the Hydrangea Mastery Guide. It sorts all 6 types in about 90 seconds, so you know exactly what you have and how hardy it is before you decide what winter protection it needs. It gives you the prune by type calendar, so you never cut off next year's flowers by mistake. It explains the real reason the color changes, which is not the pH, whatever you were told. And it walks through the 5 myths that cost people a whole season. 29 pages, $27, an instant PDF, a 7-day money-back guarantee, and the link is in the description at waltgreer.com. It ends the way this channel always does, with the truth included. 4 of the 6 types cannot change color no matter what you pour on the soil. Fertilizer will never fix a hydrangea that will not bloom, and no amount of wrapping saves a plant whose buds were already killed. A guide that only tells you what to do is only half a guide. Now, the third job, and it is one of the 2 things you must not do. Leave the flower heads on. Job 3. Leave the spent flower heads on the plant over winter. Do not cut them off. This is the first of the 2 things you must not do before frost. And it catches people because tidying up feels like exactly the right thing to do in autumn. The urge is completely understandable. The flowers have faded to brown, the plant looks messy, and clearing away the dead heads to neaten it for winter feels like good, responsible gardening. On a hydrangea heading into frost, it is a mistake, and here is why. Those old, dried flower heads and the stems beneath them are doing a quiet job through winter. They protect the tender flower buds sitting just below them. On the old wood types, next year's buds are on the upper stems, and leaving the spent blooms and the stem intact gives those buds a layer of shelter from the harshest cold and wind. Cut the heads off, and you expose the buds directly, right when they are most vulnerable. The dead flowers you are itching to remove are acting as little umbrellas over next year's flowers. There is a second reason, and it applies to every type. Cutting into the plant in autumn, right before winter, can stimulate a little new growth or leave fresh open wounds on the stems. And that tender new growth and those cut ends are easily damaged by frost, causing dieback down into the plant. So a pre-winter tidy does not just expose the buds, it can actively invite cold damage into stems that were fine. The plant is far better left uncut going into the cold. So resist the tidy. Leave the faded flower heads standing, leave the stems alone, and let the whole plant go into winter as it is. There is a bonus too. Those dried heads look genuinely beautiful with frost or a dusting of snow on them, and they give the winter garden some structure when everything else is bare. The real pruning, for whichever type you have, happens at its proper time, and that is not now. Right before frost, the shears stay away. Now, job 4. The other thing to stop doing, feeding. Job 4. Stop feeding it, and let it harden off. If you are still giving your hydrangea any fertilizer this late, stop, because feeding now works directly against the plant's winter preparation. This is the second thing to stop doing, and it comes from the same good intention as the last one. It feels like you should build the plant up before the hardship of winter. Give it a good feed to send it into the cold strong. A feed now does the opposite, and on the old wood types it can cost you next year's flowers. The problem is what fertilizer, nitrogen especially, tells the plant to do. It pushes fresh, soft new growth, and that is the last thing a hydrangea should be doing as winter approaches. The plant needs to be slowing down, stopping growth, and hardening off its existing wood for the cold. A late feed overrides that, forcing tender new shoots that have no time to mature. And the first hard frost kills that soft growth outright, causing dieback into the plant. So instead of a stronger plant, you get a damaged one going into winter. There is a second cost on the bud setting types. Late feeding pulls the plant's energy toward making leaves right when it should be moving energy down into the roots for storage and finishing next year's buds, so a late feed can actually reduce next year's flowering while also leaving frost-tender growth to be killed. So the rule is to have stopped feeding well before now. Fertilizing should end by late summer, so by the time frost is approaching, no feed of any kind should be going on the plant. Let it wind down naturally. Drop its leaves, pull its energy inward, and harden off. That is exactly what it needs to do, and the best thing you can do is get out of its way and let it happen. If you feel you must add something, the only thing to add now is that mulch from Job 2, which protects without forcing any growth. Everything else waits until spring. Now, Job 5. And this is the big one for anyone with harsh winters. Real winter protection for the vulnerable types. Job 5. For the vulnerable types in cold climates, give the plant real winter protection. This is the big job, and it is also the one where being honest about who needs it matters most, because a lot of you do not need it at all. Start with who this is for, because doing it to the wrong plant is wasted effort. This job is for the old wood types, above all the big leaf mopheads and lace caps, and the mountain hydrangeas, and only in genuinely cold winter climates. Those are the plants carrying next year's exposed flower buds on their stems all winter, so those are the buds worth protecting from a hard freeze. If you grow a panicle or a smooth hydrangea, or you are in a mild climate, you can largely skip this, because those types flower on new wood and have no exposed buds to lose, and the deep mulch from earlier is protection enough. So this is specifically for the bud-exposed types where winters are harsh. For those plants, the aim is to shield the whole above-ground structure, the stems and their buds, from the worst of the cold and the drying winter wind. The classic method is to build a cage around the plant, a cylinder of chicken wire or mesh, and fill it loosely with insulating material, dry leaves, straw, or pine needles, packing it gently around and over the stems. That surrounds the buds with a protective, insulating layer that buffers them from extreme cold and wind, and you leave it in place all winter and remove it in spring once hard frosts have passed. For a smaller or younger plant, you can wrap it, mounding mulch or leaves up over the base, and loosely wrapping the stems with burlap to shelter them. The principle is the same either way. Insulate the stems and buds, and block the drying wind, without sealing the plant up airtight. 2 honest points. First, timing. Do this after the plant is dormant and the cold has genuinely set in, not while it is still mild, because wrapping a plant too early, while it is still active, can do more harm than good. And second, this is real work, and it is only worth it if you have a bud-exposed type in a cold zone. If that is not you, the watering and the mulch already did the important part. Now, the 6th and last job, and it comes with the final thing you must not do: cleaning up. Job 6. Clean up the fallen, diseased leaves from under the plant before winter. And while we are here, the last thing you must not do, which is prune. Take the cleanup first. If your hydrangea had any leaf disease this year, powdery mildew, that white dusty coating, or leaf spot, those brown and purple blotches, then the leaves it is dropping now are carrying the disease. Those fallen, infected leaves sit on the ground through winter and become next year's source of infection, waiting for spring rain to splash the spores back up onto the fresh new growth. So raking up and removing the fallen leaves from under and around the plant genuinely reduces next year's disease, on a plant that then starts the season clean. Get the debris out from under the plant, and do not compost diseased leaves, because a home compost pile rarely gets hot enough to kill the spores, so composting them just stores the problem and hands it back to you. Bag them, or bin them, away from the garden. One small caution that connects to the mulch job. Clearing away diseased leaves is good, but you still want that protective mulch layer over the root zone. So remove the old infected leaves, then apply fresh, clean mulch. You are getting rid of the disease reservoir, not the insulation. Now the last thing you must not do, and it ties the whole video together. Do not prune your hydrangea before winter. This is worth stating plainly because the bare, dormant-looking plant in late autumn seems to be asking for a tidy-up cut, and it is a trap. On the old wood types, those stems carry next year's flower buds, so cutting them now removes next year's flowers. And on any type, cutting right before winter can force tender growth or leave open wounds that frost damages, causing dieback. Pruning has its proper time, and for every type that time is not right before frost. The only cutting allowed now is removing wood that is already genuinely dead, damaged, or diseased, which you can take off at any time, because it carries nothing worth keeping. Everything else, the shears stay away until the correct pruning season for your type. Let me pull the whole thing together. Before we finish, send this to one person you know with a hydrangea, and tell them to do it before the frost. Just the link. There is a very good chance they think the plant is finished for the year, and there is nothing left to do, when in fact these few weeks are what decide whether it comes back next June. Here is the whole thing in one idea. What you do before the first frost decides what your hydrangea looks like next summer, because right now the plant is storing its energy for next year and, on many types, carrying next year's flower buds on its stems through the whole winter. Protect that now, or regret it next June. So water it deeply, right up until the ground freezes, because a hydrangea going into winter dry is far more likely to come out of it damaged. Mulch the base generously, several inches deep, because that steady insulation over the roots is the single most protective thing you can do, and it is the job people most often skip. Leave the spent flower heads on, because they shelter next year's buds, and cutting now exposes them and invites dieback. Stop feeding it, and let it harden off, because a late feed forces soft growth the frost kills. And if you have a bud-exposed type, a big leaf or mountain hydrangea, in a genuinely cold climate, give it real winter protection, a cage packed with leaves or a burlap wrap, to carry those buds safely through to spring. Then, clean up any diseased leaves so they cannot overwinter and reinfect the plant. And whatever you do not prune before frost, because on the old wood types that removes next year's flowers, and on any type it invites cold damage. Dead and damaged wood can come off, nothing else. How much of this you need depends on your type and your climate, so know what you are growing. But get the watering and the mulch right at the very least. And you have done the most important part. And next June, the plant rewards you for it, while your neighbor wonders why theirs came back so poorly. Subscribe and hit the bell and stick around. We do this the honest way here in the Forgotten Knowledge Library, which means telling you which jobs actually matter, which types even need protecting, and the 2 things to stop doing before winter. It is free, and it always will be. And drop a comment telling me what your winters are like and which hydrangeas you grow, because the right amount of frost prep is different for every one of you, and I am happy to help you work out yours. Next time, another job the season quietly depends on that most people never get to. I will see you in the next one.